Why shouldn't I have it? My cloud person sky.
Please pay attention to the following trigger warnings on screen. Suzy Doodletones, as much as they claim not to be, was a main figurehead in the Slideshow commentary community with 15.1k subscribers and had gained quite a reputation given their involvement in dramas and situations such as Medica, Just a Robot, and Spoctor, along with the main thing many people dogged on them for, and that was the reveal of their diaper fetish, where Suzy would claim that Medica coined said name, Doodle Diapers, that Suzy would use to bash people who insulted them with said nickname, despite the fact that it had recently been proven that Suzy was the person who coined the phrase on their old DeviantArt account. But despite all that, she was seen as a reputable person in the community, until the FCK logs were published tying them back to that situation, where they took their leave around this time last year, where victims of the FCK had asked them to take a hiatus from the internet. Some of you who are a regular on the channel may remember it from when I covered the Ruby lighter fluid situation, and how I mentioned multiple people were in that server, including Doodletones, who sat idly on this. More information about that situation will be listed down below. Now you may be asking yourself, where did their channel go, given how much was archived on it, and they had only been asked to take a hiatus and not vanish forever? Well, I would like to direct you to a video Suzy uploaded in 2021 about a person called George Raccoon, another member of the SCC, who had been around Doodle and the space to the earliest recollection of 2016, as seen in this Skype chat. George Raccoon had been accused of grooming a minor called Leo in the form of a document that had been posted in 2019, explaining how George would expose them to their kink and normalize it to them, the kink being a certain magic trick, and also, and George will deny this, Snow White, a character in its most common depiction being aged 14, where George would draw people's characters in that dress. Now, why had Suzy taken so long to cover the topic? Well, they had actually spent those 2 years singing George, more commonly known as Horus's, good praises, in preparation for said video's release, where Suzy would proceed to defend him. This is the story of how a key figure in the Slideshow commentary community defended a groomer, allowed them back into their community, and caused victims to apologize, along with said victims even ending up in the same spaces as their groomer. As a preface for this video, Suzy has been facing backlash on other situations that are now being revisited, and others will be talking about them in due time. I understand the limit of my scope and will be mainly focusing on the horror situation, so now, without further ado, let's get into it. 2019, Suzy's George Raccoon stream. Back in 2019, before Suzy even made the Horus video, they hosted a stream where they came to his defense. Unfortunately, there isn't much if any record of this stream occurring, aside from multiple testimonies, and the backlash Doodletones got from said stream for blaming the victim for the actions Horus took. Doodle would then later go on to cry about this in Horus's DMs, when they were planning to do their video in 2021, saying how the SEC quote-unquote bullied them into silence. But we will get into the DMs between Doodle and Horus in due time. 2021. Can we please talk about George Raccoon? In this part, I will mainly be dissecting the insanity of Suzy's video in defense of Horus, that thankfully still exists thanks to Internet Archive. Well, I may as well explain why a lot of this information is hard to come by, and how Doodle had deleted their channel. In Doodle's own words, accidentally, when in 2025 the George video was learnt about more widely by people such as Lio Convoy and Chuli, where they had requested Doodle hand over ownership of the account due to it having a lot of important archive calls and videos, along with information in the comment sections on said videos, which Doodle agreed to do, but explained they had accidentally deleted it, which is a very convenient excuse, and utter bullshit in my opinion, as anyone who has owned a YouTube account or Google account would know there are several safeguards in place to stop that from happening. And the only defense Suzy provides for this is,
This is fucking extortion!
but I won't dwell on this point too long. Here is the video.
God, this video terrifies me. Before you jump to a conclusion, please hear me out. October 6th, 2019, the Slideshow commentary community was hit with a document posted by user Channel Gray, written by an ex-user Leo whatever, detailing their experience talking with ex-commentator George Raccoon. This experience, explaining how they felt groomed by George, was the first time in recent memory that the SCC ever dealt with an expose in the typical cancel culture way. In retort, instead of defending himself, George left the internet, presumably admitting to his guilt, depending on who you ask.
Straight off the bat, we can see George outright admitting to what he did to Leo and how he allowed someone who he knew was a minor to access their NSFW account. And I quote, "I deleted my YouTube account, I deleted my Twitters. I protected my Twitter because I felt people don't want to look at it. And upon my mum's request, okay, I took down the major accounts. However, I realize now that some will see this as me running away from my responsibility, even when some want me to withdraw from the internet entirely, or Charlie telling me to do chemical castration. I'm not happy at myself for what I have caused, there is no defending myself, and there is no point in beating myself up about it, even when it's really hard not to. The intention I had in my mind between me and Leo was that I shared the videos because it looked like he was liking them. I didn't know that something was wrong with that, I was doing until it was too late. There's no going back to fixing it. What happened, happened. It's not good for me to shrug off something as big as that. Was what I did wrong? Absolutely. And I have a lot to learn from all of this. I know now not to share my NSFW stuff with a minor, and to be a lot more considerate about how they feel. When I was sending him videos and stuff about him in a dress, I wasn't thinking about fucking Leo or doing anything sexual with him. This is the part where it's the trickiest to word myself, as I'm walking on eggshells as I'm typing this and explaining myself. Immediately there is a contradicting point here of not having the intention of doing anything sexual with him, and yet you showed your NSFW account with a minor and share said fetish of disappearing acts because he liked them. Just because a minor likes guns doesn't mean I'm gonna hand him a rifle and tell him to have fun. Are we being so for real right now?
So, to begin this structural disaster of a video, I guess let's break down what the accusations themselves are. Mind you, the way that I'm wording these is just what the accusations are. Obviously, I'll be spending the rest of the duration of this video detailing which ones are accurate and which ones definitely needed more evidence. But with that said, the accusations are that George, who was in his 20s, led an at-the-time minor on his NSFW-ish account.
Off the bat, Suzy completely misinterprets the document intentionally here by saying that the allegation is a minor got access. If we actually read the document, it states the following, and I quote, "I am not typically allowed on my friends' NSFW accounts because, well, I'm still a minor. I do not ask for permission to access these accounts because that would be inappropriate. And my friends don't invite me to follow them because that would be even more inappropriate. But I did follow one porn account of one of my friends, and whilst George described his account as NSFW-ish, he still openly spoke about what was sexually arousing to him, which by default makes it inappropriate for minors such as myself. I will stress that during the time I followed the account, I saw that there were other minors on it as well, but they were people I didn't know personally, so that kept me from reaching out to them. The rule of his account was that he had to reach out to you and allow you on there. And he did. He reached out to me, he invited me, a 16-year-old, he actively wanted me to follow it. And if you want to be like that and tell me I shouldn't have been on it in the first place, then fine, go ahead. I didn't know it was NSFW until I started following it, but once I saw the words NSFW-ish in the bio, I should have immediately left. I should have, but I didn't. I liked George himself, rationalized it was okay because it was only partly NSFW, we were both in the wrong for that. I'll take responsibility for that if I have to." End quote. Now, by itself, that may sound like a minor slip up, but this kind of language is consistent throughout this video. Note how what's said here is a subtle but much more damaging allegation compared to what Suzy is trying to portray. Now you may be saying, "Yen, you're giving Suzy too much credit. Suzy is a deranged moron." Right? Well, you are right. But what I mean by this is that I would like to show you a pattern of behavior here of how Suzy uses their own personal vested interest in a situation to go ahead and sway it which way or the other. Something I will build on much later into this video, and in all honesty, the situation I'm referring to deserves its own video in of itself, but I will explain it all in due time.
He would draw his friends, including said minor, in Snow White dresses, which were a fetish of his, send pictures of himself wearing said dress to the minor, this was seen as him being sexual, would constantly pester the minor, who, should also mention at this point, was trans, into wearing said dress, which was uncomfortable for them, came back to doing all this stuff after being confronted about it initially, sent videos of magic tricks to a minor, magic tricks being another fetish of his. After Leo broke off the friendship with George, he had blown up in their DMs with a lot of concerning self-destructive messages, and blatantly admitted to grooming Leo. Wow, these accusations seem rather damning, right? It's cut and dry. That should be the end of it. Video over. George groomed Leo. Roll credits. Except this is when I scream in frustration at how quickly people were to believe these accusations, especially in 2019, a year after the Spockter theory situation happened. So let's go over what is and isn't true within this document, starting with something that is objectively true, because I do want to go into this as unbiased as humanly possible. I won't be able to go into it fully unbiased, of course, but, you know, I'll give it a fair chance. George did let Leo onto his NSFW-ish account. So, to elaborate, as someone who also followed that account at the time, George had a specific account where he could share more adult themes to his friends who were more comfortable with it. There wasn't anything necessarily explicit ever posted on there, I want to assure you, and this was detailed out the gate for anyone who followed that account.
As we can see on this screen, it clearly states how George would post things related to his fetishes, which by its nature is sexual. At least for George, including bunny suits, something intrinsically sexual, finding its most common association to the Playboy company and the magazines it releases, and is an outfit that is of a sexual nature, not to mention George's more discreet kinks like magic tricks being listed. You could make the point in saying Snow White isn't a fetish for Horus, but given it is stated to be posted on his NSFW account, I find a very hard time believing this. A point I will build upon later into this video.
As the pinned tweet had this image directly connect to it. You may be noticing some other things on here that'll be important later, and don't worry, we'll come back to them. The important part of this image at the moment though is rule number 1. Porn and nudity will not be retweeted on here. So nothing that George shared directly was NSFW. So in that sense, he was fine. However, considering that he did label it as NSFW-ish, that's still arguably not exactly okay, and as someone who's kept in touch with him for all this time, yes, even he acknowledges in hindsight this was not okay. So sure, in that sense, George was irresponsible. Not to the extent he should be ostracized and crucified for it, personally I'd argue, but definitely should have been informed that this was not okay. So with that out of the way, I would also like to confirm something else explained in Leo's document, being that George did have a habit of self-destructing at the time, and I think just about everyone who was friends with him at the time had told him that this was a problem at some point. So him going into Leo's DMs in the screenshots we do see towards the end of the document are kinda on brand. This is also something I'd argue shouldn't be a huge strike against George though, as we don't see him doing it maliciously in the screenshots we get. In fact, everything that George says in those screenshots are evidence more against the idea that he was doing it to be purposely manipulative.
The very fact that Horus got called out for his horrific actions by Leo and is now self-deprecating himself to his victim is manipulative, Doodle. Given these screenshots were in the document, it is apparent to me that this could be seen as Horus trying to silence his own victim by apologizing here and there. Despite the fact that earlier in this video you showed the part of in 2019 how Horus wanted to draw Leo in a dress, but also how in 2017 when Leo was 14, Horus had wanted to draw Leo before, but under Leo's friend's guidance had been told to not do that ever. But Horus had asked about it again and continued to engage with a minor in this manner, as if he had never given up on the idea of getting Leo specifically drawn in a dress, and normalized him to the idea of engaging in Horus's poorly disguised fetish. I think there's a word for that, Doodle.
As his messages say that he fucked up, and that Leo shouldn't feel bad or concerned about anything he was saying, trying to reassure Leo that they can move on. But did George have any reason to feel as such? Well, this is why this video exists, because I plan to make the argument that no, I don't think he should. Now, mind you, I'm not an expert, I should get that out of the gate. I'm merely giving my thoughts and feelings on this 2-year-old situation, and why I disagreed with the common consensus. Whether or not you think I'm right or wrong by the end of it is entirely up to you. If your mind's made up, it's made up. I won't fight you on it. And as such, I want to stress to not go out and harass the individuals involved in this situation, especially given what I have to say about the situation by the end of it all. 1, because, yeah, this drama is about 2 years old and most everyone has moved on. 2, nobody, no matter how heinous their actions are, deserves harassment.
Find a bridge, Horus.
Contrary to the popular belief. And 3, because harassing people is lame. Plain and simple. So now that I have the formalities out of the way, let's begin with the first part of the grooming allegation, the Snow White dress. So, something to note about George is that his favorite Disney princess is Snow White, and apparently in accordance to Leo, he and George would bond over their mutual appreciation for the character. Leo would allow George to draw their character wearing the dress of the titular character, and didn't see anything wrong with it until Gwen, another character in this story, informed Leo that the dress was a kink of George's, and that George was forbidden to draw anything regarding Leo in her dress. But, hold on. George's aforementioned rules bulletin explicitly mentions that he doesn't see Snow White as a kink of his. This was established on his NSFW-ish account from the beginning. So for Leo to sit there and believe something that was blatantly against that established descriptor feels kind of sketchy to me. Especially when Leo follows up explaining this to the reader that if you ask George about Snow White being a kink of his, he'd deny it, which always struck me as strange. To sit here and preemptively revoke any further discussion on this kind of topic by making such a blanket and certain statement claiming the subject to be a liar when the information they give doesn't match your own feels, ironically enough, like a lie in of itself. The tone of this document is to inform or educate people on your own experiences with an individual you claim to have groomed you. But as much as it typically isn't what people want to hear, there usually is two sides to a story such as this. And without the proper evidence to prove that your opposition has a behavioral pattern with lying or manipulation, this kind of claim feels more like its sole purpose is to shine a much more malicious light on your target instead of giving out the truth. Or at the very least, a believable testimony, which isn't something you would want to do if your goal is to educate people on a groomer in the community. But to me, it doesn't have to be a straight-up sexual thing, because it is clearly something he finds appealing. I'd also like to directly respond to this, because I find it to be frustrating. This claim would only be valid if we were to be under the pre-notion that George's appreciation for Snow White was sexual in nature, which, as I demonstrated, I don't have any reason to believe is the case, and with that, George could find this dress to be an aesthetic appeal, or maybe an appeal to nostalgia, or literally any other appeal that you could look at that's used in art and advertising. Appeal doesn't have to be sexual. This is again unfortunate to this document because anyone who thinks about this for longer than a minute tops could come to the same conclusion. I like to draw hoodies on my characters that don't typically have them and call them cool jackets because they're fun and there's an appeal in drawing that.
Yes, Doodle, because in Leo's document there's no sign of Horus intertwining his known kink of magic tricks and the Snow White dress. Oh wait, there is a pattern in the screenshots of Horus and Leos' tweet DMs of Horus messaging about the Snow White dress, followed up by sharing videos of magic tricks. Horus is king. Even Horus himself says how he was currently wearing a Snow White dress while sending Leo a magic trick video. So no, Doodle, I don't think it's insane to say that the Snow White dress was a kink. But Doodle would never sully something as innocent as Snow White with the form of, oh, I don't know, children in diapers.
That doesn't mean hoodies turn me on. Get real. Anyway, then Leo explains that Gwen chewed George out about it. George backed down from drawing Leo in a Snow White dress. Probably intimidated by Gwen, if I'm to be honest. Though, of course, that would be something you'd have to ask the supposed groomer in this scenario. And then cut to 2 years later in 2019. George winds up drawing Leo in a Snow White dress twice. Leo goes on to make the theory that it's because by this point they didn't hang out with Gwen anymore, and George, quote-unquote, knew he wouldn't be called out about it. And I'm so glad Leo clarified it as such, because otherwise it would heavily look like a narrative was being spun to ruin someone, and we definitely wouldn't want that. But in reality, could we not make the argument that George just forgot about what happened 2 years prior? Leo doesn't clarify that there was any conversation regarding the two of them that would have reminded George of the conversation in question, so this is again, at best, just an assumption on Leo's end that paints George in a much different light than what might have been the actual truth of the matter. Plus, Leo even tells us following this that George asked to draw the first piece for them, so even if he did remember, maybe he wanted to see if the opinion on the matter changed from whatever Gwen might have talked to George about, since we also didn't get that side of the story, and was instead just told to get it through Gwen's at the time Twitter handle.
Ah yes, the mighty commentary amnesia of 2 years elapsing from being told something very bluntly, not to do something, but doing it anyway.
Following this, there's an explanation of George's self-destructive behavior, before going on to justify that as the reason Leo said yes to everything that George did. And it's here that I really start questioning matters, because throughout the entire document, there's not a whole lot of screenshots to help Leo's case, and Leo does explain that because George deleted everything, they didn't exactly have the time or ability to screen cap everything that they thought was important. And like, okay, I get that. But when the screenshots that you do share are just you happily nodding to everything and getting excited that George drew you in a Snow White dress while simultaneously telling us, the reader, that you were uncomfortable about it all, then pardon me for looking at this whole situation skeptically. Did George know that these images made you uncomfortable? Did you tell him they did? Because even in accordance to your own document, that doesn't seem to be the case. You tell us that you said it was okay before going on your own self-deprecating tirade about the fact that you'll throw yourself to the dogs for your friends.
Way to put the blame on a victim for not voicing how uncomfortable they were when being groomed, and mock them for expressing their emotion in a document where they're coming out about their experiences. Real nice.
And I'd even be able to give the benefit of doubt in saying that you could have felt uncomfortable about it all in hindsight, but then not only would that be a lie because you actively told us that your mind wandered to the aforementioned conversation with Gwen, but also, that's in hindsight. This wouldn't change the reaction we see in the screenshots that Leo gave us that would have given George the idea that this was not only okay, but encouraged.
I just want to remind you, this is an interaction between someone who had known Horus since they were 14 years old, and knows Horus can self-destruct and self-deprecate himself when challenged or pushed on things, and having that thought lingering over their head while speaking to them. The point in saying Leo would throw themselves in front of a bus for their friends would mean that they would rather suffer than see his friends suffer. That would include Horus. You are saying you got flack for putting the onus on a child, Doodle, and yet you are doing it right here whilst making this point explicitly leaving out the parts where Horus does share his blatant kink of magic tricks to make your point.
Oh, but Doodle, are you trying to say that it's Leo's fault he was groomed? No, I'm saying this isn't grooming at all. A very common tactic of grooming is testing the boundaries to figure out how you can push past them to get into a sexual context. For another example, and I apologize in advance for using an actual instance of grooming as an example. I'm aware of how tasteless this could come off, but I feel it's important to show that what it would look like had George actually been trying to groom Leo in a situation such as this.
Then don't do it. I want to make a point in how disgusting and lowering of a victim's experiences when you compare two different cases in this way. You are outright saying, well, it isn't as bad as this case of grooming, so it can't be that bad, and catering to the audience and community's understanding of a known and proven case of predation to undermine the voices of those affected in the Horus situation.
Since our community actually has an example. So, let's talk about V Omega. V Omega was outed not even a full year after George's allegations by Joni Ruin at Twitlonger. This post outlined that V was an abusive, controlling, transphobic groomer, and I will happily concur to those labels. I'll be talking my experience with them in another video if it's not already out, because I'll have to then. I'll leave a link below to the full Twitlonger if you wish to read up on it all, but the particular centerpiece that I want to look at, of course, is the grooming allegations. Though, while Joni didn't exactly have any screenshots relating to that particular allegation and was much more focused on V's abusive behavior, V sure as hell was willing to give them in a now deleted Twitter thread he was making responding to it all. Luckily, I have the important receipts. So, here's a screenshot that V took of their DMs from January of 2018. You can see here that V and Joni are talking about pornography, with Joni explicitly saying that she was not one to look at pornography. By April of the same year, the topic was brought up again, with Joni admitting to sometimes looking at specifically furry porn. By March of the next year, while we don't see the fullest extent of this screenshot, we can see that Joni was all for talking about pornography, showing that V's attempt to wear down her boundaries was, unfortunately, grossly successful. The fucking creep. But we don't see that with George. We're only told that through the lens of Leo, and even through that lens we can see that Leo never vocalized these feelings. So, how do we know that George's motivations are more malicious than maybe tone deaf? We literally can't, and I'm tired of acting like this was okay. Plus, I want to point out that these drawings that Leo alluded to being a source of George's grooming. Even if they were sexual, it wasn't exclusive to Leo, which also puts into question how much of this could actually be considered as such.
Also, Doodletones is outright lying here by saying that Joni didn't have screenshots of the grooming occurring, and yet, the document they put out was full to the fucking brim with evidence. This document came out in 2020, as you can see currently scrolling across the screen. To say that there is not evidence of predation and grooming here is idiotic.
I've mentioned this in my Sherman videos before, but grooming is a targeted action. Sure, you could argue someone can groom more than one person, but when George is making these kinds of images for anyone who's his friend above just a selection of people, then I'm sorry, even if these had sexual undertones, it would just be grossly irresponsible and inappropriate at worst.
You admit someone can groom multiple people and then say it's just gross negligence? And need I say how the other people he had drawn in the Snow White dress had access to his NSFW Twitter were also minors. Also yes, you heard that right, Doodle was clearly aware there wasn't just one person Horus drew in the Snow White dresses, but we will get onto that in its own section. I would also like to point out a pattern in behaviour here. I will touch on throughout this part of the video, and that is by focusing in on the Snow White dress being the smoking gun of the source of George's grooming, helps to reduce the narrative overall, which shows how George is predatory. And what I mean by this is the use of the V Omega situation as a point of comparison to this less blatant example of grooming is used to make the audience feel like by comparison what George did was forgivable or less severe. I know Doodletones comes from the SEC where power ranking is rampant in videos, but power ranking grooming is insane.
Now, let's look at the spin-off to this allegation. George bought his own Snow White dress to wear, posted pictures on his NSFW-ish Twitter, and allegedly gave Leo some pictures of his own whilst pestering Leo to wear one themselves. I really don't know what more to say. This is just more of the same, unfortunately. Leo goes around painting Snow White as one of George's kinks, which has been put into question. Leo makes a very extreme statement claiming that George was sending him pictures of himself wearing that outfit directly, making the claim. The number of photos I got from him wearing the dress was almost 10 times the amount that he posted on his timeline. It very much became a weekly thing for him to do. He would send me 5 or more pictures of him in the dress and ask me for compliments, my overall thoughts, and if he looked cute/pretty. This is then followed by 0 screenshots of George doing this and being probably the most frustrating example at the lack of screenshots being an issue with this document. Like, I can concede to the idea that maybe Leo wasn't able to get everything. Fine. Like, I'm not even saying that if Leo doesn't have every receipt in the world that these allegations should be put under extreme scrutiny. And I can accept the lack of evidence to a degree. But Leo is making such an enormous claim here alluding to George explicitly targeting them, and if there were that many instances of George doing this, why don't we even see one of them? You were able to get a screen cap between you and George talking about a dress, again with the problem of you visually not setting any boundaries for George to push, but I think I've hammered that in enough. But with the evidence showing George sending direct pics of him wearing the Snow White dress, it doesn't exist. Why?
Because as you had previously noted, Doodle, Leo wasn't able to grab everything they thought necessary, and yet you choose to harp on this instead of the stuff we do actually see, which is evident enough as seen in the screenshots. You are again expecting a victim to know everything to save when being put through this.
This is one of your biggest allegations and easily one of your most damning ones to boot. Ugh. Anyway, following this, we then get the dysphoria conversation, Leo being an NB trans mask, and this one's a bit more of a gray area. I'm not going to put into question whether dresses do or don't give Leo dysphoria. That is not my place to say. I'm also not entirely too sure whether George did or didn't know whether Leo gets this way about dresses in particular. If George did know, then fuck, that's tone deaf as hell, and this could also go on the record as another one of George's actual transgressions. Get it? If he didn't, then I can't really get onto his case about it, especially since Leo doesn't show his discomfort in the screenshots, and either way, this would be he said, she said effectively. Still not grooming, mind you, but also not particularly great had George been guilty of knowingly setting off Leo's dysphoria. The continual excuse of, but George would beat himself up also doesn't exactly help matters either, because I get it, but those boundaries not being set doesn't give me any reason to believe George's intentions with these conversations are more malicious than two friends bonding over a common interest. I don't want to seem dismissive about these claims, because I can't know how Leo actually felt about these conversations. For all I know, he could have been uncomfortable, and also I get how important it is to believe a victim of abuse. Plus, yeah, not every victim of abuse will know they're being abused.
And yet you spent this entire video downplaying the victim's experience and saying how they didn't voice their discomfort, so George couldn't have known what he did was bad. Newsflash, Doodle, it is the adult's responsibility to know not to talk to a child about their kink. Hell, you even showed how you got backlash from your 2019 stream and how you victim blamed Leo. From my understanding, having spoken to people behind the scenes, this video is just a neutered down version of your 2019 stream, but the points you make here are still victim blaming and trying to get the heat off Horus by painting him as this lobotomy patient of a person with no thoughts in his head. Aside from when he's slapped on the wrist, he cries like a sniveling pussy.
But it's hard to see George as an abuser when zero boundaries were initially drawn, and instead Leo willingly partook in these conversations, leading into what we are to believe to be George's desires. Leo's words paint one picture, whereas what we can see in the screenshots paints a totally contradictory one, and we're just supposed to believe these images are one of the same. We're not done, by the way. We still have the claim of magic tricks to talk about, and out the gate, I'm screaming. One of the first things you'll notice when going on his NSFW is his pinned tweet that you are encouraged to read before interacting with his page. It was there that he detailed the things that he found sexually appealing, aka his kinks and a few rules of the account. I'm sorry? So, Leo is willing to detail what was in that pinned tweet. He even goes on to explicitly mention the Delcoded chair trick, George's favorite magic trick as outlined by his rules bulletin, but will conveniently leave out the section of Snow White when talking about that. I want to make it clear that I'm not out here trying to pin Leo as this bad person, but covering this document makes it really hard when stuff like this is scattered throughout the entire thing. It gets very blatant. But yeah, so George did have a thing for magic tricks, specifically the Delcoded chair, and yes, he even described it as a kink. So we are getting into some arguably creepy territory, and hey, credit where it's due. Leo talks about how George sent some videos involving something he finds to be his kink, and then actually shows us George doing so. However, and this is where I must remind you all that I'm not an expert and am merely giving my 2 cents on the matter, grooming is usually done with the goal of sexual or financial satisfaction, and regardless of how creepy it may seem within the DMs, and you can definitely make an argument for it or against it being creepy, at the end of the day, I'm not going to fight a person one way or another about it. However, with the screenshots that we see in Leo's document, as much as they exist and show us that George did send these videos, the screenshots seem more conversational than sexual or malicious. The first one shows George sharing the Delcoded chair trick performed by David Copperfield, before presumably going on to talk about the Snow White dress he bought for himself. By the way, cross-dressing in the way George was doing so is also not proof of George doing it to be sexual, just should get that out of the way. If he finds the dress to be more aesthetically appealing, then it's just George not having an issue with cross-dressing. If you want to make an argument otherwise, you're going to have to provide me with some proof that he does find Snow White dresses to be sexual, because I just don't have any reason to believe otherwise besides a because Leo and Gwen said so.
Ah yes, an informing pedophile. Fuck off, Doodle. I know I had made this point previously and said how Doodle left out the part of the magic trick in that part of the video, but yen, she's talking about it here, so what gives? It is intrinsically linking the Snow White dress and Horus's known kink, and I think Doodletones knows this, thus trying to separate it in this video, because, and I'm gonna be blunt, people in these spaces can seemingly use the same piece of evidence to invalidate an overarching pattern of behaviour, and so Doodle wanted to paint it as Horus simply cross-dressing, and I hate to be political for a second, but I think this was on purpose, given Doodle's audience being LGBTQ+, and anyone who would question this argument would be labelled as a transphobe, which is morally disgusting in my opinion. To finalise this particular point, I will break it down. The kink is magic tricks. Horus is wearing the Snow White dress when looking at his kink, something that arouses him, and then shares all this information with a minor he wants also to dress up as Snow White and take an interest in his magic trick kink. This is blatant grooming, Doodle. Doodletones would make a defense on their perception of kinks in one of the SCC courthouse calls where this video was first challenged.
Suzy, you spent time in fetish groups because you were fascinated by the concept. How did you not know better?
Admittedly, George's kink is quite weird, and I didn't think it was very... because it's not... like, if he didn't call it a kink, it would be entirely harmless. And as I've talked to you about in the past, Lio, I have a very weird perspective on fetishes, on fetishes and kinks in general. I don't think they necessarily have to be sexual. We've had this conversation before.
We have, but he's made it pretty clear it was.
By its very definition, and I will use an actual definition here, unlike Doodle, who's used ChatGPT before when making a definition argument, a kink is something sexual and outright stated by George as a kink. But let's talk for a second on Suzy's take on kinks. In 2015, when Doodletones was 18 years old, they posted this character sheet on DeviantArt. Important things to note here is the character in question was aged at 6 years old, and specifically marked as a character for a fetish RP. Noting that her brain is 18 years old? What? So no, Doodle, from everything you have shown online, including your own experience with kinks such as DDLG, diaper fetish, age regression, and full-on pedophilic characters for you to fulfill your sexual degeneracy on, you have failed to list one instance where a kink isn't sexual, and every instance you have tried to state otherwise is to simply try and cover yourself from some heat from your detractors. No wonder you have no issue with what George has been doing given your own degeneracy.
The second screenshot was just George talking about how he did draw Leo's character doing the trick, but never actually showed it to Leo, nor did Leo really call George out on being uncomfortable about it.
Horus has now finalized my previous point where he has now placed Leo in his sexual desires by drawing him in the magic trick. This is Horus's own admission. Just because he didn't show it doesn't make it any less valuable as a piece of proof.
Prefaced by Leo continuing the narrative of just because George feels guilty about things means you can't draw boundaries, apparently, as evidenced by the following statements. I did watch them all, but only because I felt pressured to. Maybe it would have been easy for you to say no, but I can't do that. I can't shut someone down like that, especially not someone like George, who practically lives by the philosophy of don't call me out of my bullshit, because I will beat myself up until you feel like a monster and drop the charges.
I can't believe this needs saying, but it is not the responsibility of a child to draw a boundary with an adult. That responsibility entirely is on the adult in the situation, every single time. If we are saying that every single time that a child gets groomed and they don't draw up boundaries or fight the grooming that is taking place, that somehow means that it's not grooming, apparently.
He had done this multiple times. Looking back on it now, I can only really describe it as him forcing his kink on me. We'll talk about his motivations another time, but that is what he is doing. Which only really reaffirms that this was a document that had more of a narrative woven into it, more than just informing people of what happened.
This may sound like a lesser point given the communities that we're all in, but I'll build on it later. However, Doodle saying there's a narrative woven into the document is a subtle and incorrect use of the word narrative. Everything we say is a narrative when it comes from our own personal experience of how events transpire, including this document. And some of you may have realized at this point, Doodle is trying to do the thing she's claiming the document does and twist the narrative of the situation. From my own looking at the document, there is nothing but factual information pertaining to George, even stuff Doodletones have verified, like his consistent outbursts. And even when screenshots are used in the document and Leo explains the context behind them below, it isn't malicious. It isn't twisting anything we don't see or is confirmed. Hell, we don't see the Skype messages, and yet Doodle doesn't question the fact George had been told to not draw Leo in the Snow White dress. It is simply using verbiage and is it actually though argumentation to twist and alter a narrative to suit Doodle's favour, given their own personal vested interest in having these allegations cleared from George, due to her long-standing relationship with him.
By now at this point, you might be wondering what my point is bringing all this stuff up, as it looks like I'm trying to make Leo out to be this worse individual than he is, and that would be a fair assumption to make, especially with just how frustrated I've been getting at this document. However, to clear the air, I'm not saying Leo is doing any of this stuff on purpose. This feels more impulsive than vindictive. Reading the document as much as I have, you can tell he felt very emotional writing it. If this is truly how he felt on the matter, then fine. I'm not going to invalidate someone's feelings on the matter because I can't feasibly know how he actually felt.
Well, I'm so sorry a victim felt emotional, Doodle. I'm sorry that upsets you so much and somehow invalidates screenshots and their feelings.
My point, ultimately, at the end of the day, is that I don't feel as if George is a groomer. There's just not enough evidence to label him as such. Grooming is a targeted, manipulative action used to get something out of a minor, but nothing we see in the screenshots Leo shows demonstrate any form of attempted sexual or financial satisfaction on George's end. I must be fair and reiterate that yes, Leo could have been very uncomfortable by everything the two of them talked about. George could have been very inappropriate, and yes, he was absolutely irresponsible. I'm not saying he did nothing wrong. I just don't see a groomer here. And I feel as if there were people who kinda saw it too quickly. When finally confronted, George ended the final conversation with Leo, admitting to his mistakes and fessing up to the fact that he didn't know these conversations with Leo made Leo uncomfortable. He asked what he could do to make things better besides not grooming, showing that the accusation was something he even believed. And personally, this is my least favorite part of Leo's document. George was apologizing for everything that Leo had taken issue with. Sure, George's apology was self-destructive. As I said, he did have a habit of doing that. However, George also, at the end of the day, understood that the two of them needed time apart. Why was this looked at as a groomer trying to get with a child? Like, George couldn't have known that these conversations were uncomfortable or were seen as inappropriate until Leo told him, because As stated before, there were no boundaries drawn between the two of them.
I think you're forgetting that Horus was a public figure and had a lot to lose if this ever became public. He most definitely separated from Leo in order to get heat off of him and make himself look like a responsible person. He had been caught and the only thing he could do now was run away.
Once there finally were, George apologized and then the two of them unfollowed each other's vents, breaking off the friendship with each other. This is just not the behavior of a manipulative person. Leo's confusion in this document too is honest to God justified because George saying that he didn't know what he was doing was wrong and apologizing for grooming are two totally contradictory ideas. Because grooming is intentional. Like, yes, you could say George is admitting to grooming here and is apologizing for such, but like, I don't believe that George would have seen it as such had Leo not initially brought it up in their conversation. Neither of them were even sure that this was the case. It was just something that someone else said was grooming.
I want to point out that Gwen, also known as Saph, is a victim of George. Also in this instance, the morals of the person making the document can sure be brought into question, however, it does not push away the actual evidence and invalidate the evidence put forward.
Ugh. At the end of the day, to recap, do I think George groomed Leo? No.
Then you're a moron.
Do I think George was irresponsible? Absolutely. Do I think this document does its job properly? No. Do I think Leo should have drawn boundaries with George sooner? Yes. Do I think Leo is a bad person? No. Do I believe Leo was a victim? Well, personally speaking, yes. That last one might be a bit of a confusing statement to make, what with everything I outlined today, but if you'll allow me, I have been thinking about this document a lot, and as I said earlier, I don't believe Leo wrote this document with the goal to purposely ruin George's friendships or reputation in the community. The language used within this document seems more concerned and scared than anything else, almost as if somebody else implanted the belief that this behavior was grooming. And we know that there is, considering Gwen's reaction to George drawing people in Snow White dresses.
The narrative that the idea of grooming was implanted is foul. You are doing the opposite end of the spectrum in this video by claiming something isn't grooming when everything so far would prove otherwise. It is not the minor's responsibility to draw boundaries with an adult. You are literally putting it on Leo to do that, Doodle. The rest of this video is Doodle speculating on if Charlie or Gwen, people in the document, was manipulating Leo into thinking they were being groomed, which has absolutely no basis, and given its speculation, I won't be including it. However, it has recently this year been learnt that Gwen, also known as Saph, was a victim of George, and Doodle's complete disregard or willingness to speak to them at the time of this video being made meant that they were ostracized and not even considered as someone who would be a victim. This is even evident in the comments section of the video, where when Saph tried to explain further, they were met with dismissing remarks from people in the SEC in the replies, as seen here, allowing for the SEC's tribalism to continue and pushing them into the arms of Vivian, also known as Charlie, who would also later be outed as a groomer and abuser. But all in all, somehow, this video got good reception by the community and those around it. But to move forward with the effect of this video, we have to go back to the backlash that Suzy got in 2019 from their stream, and how in the 2 years between 2019 and 2021, they went around the community warming people up to the idea of Horus not being a bad person in preparation for their 2021 video. For proof of this, we can look at Doodletones' own DMs with Horus at that time.
I know you didn't intend it, but this image gives me bad memories.
Yeah, sorry about that. If it's any consolation, I fought against what I could at the time. And it's not like everyone hates you. The Cloud Palace just kinda hopes you've been doing okay since then.
Really?
Yeah, I was talking to them about it a few days ago. One person in there in particular would really like to meet you, actually.
Who?
Mansvega Ventanov.
Oh.
Fairly new commentator, I don't know if you've heard of him.
I saw them once in a comment on one of my videos. They said it was fine for me to like Snow White in a comment.
Oh, well yeah, he doesn't seem to have any qualms with that situation. Again, I personally thought from what I saw, at worst, you were seriously irresponsible with the not safe for work account.
I definitely was. I shouldn't have given it to Leo, Gwen, or Autumn.
It's why I'm keeping in contact. Irresponsibility is a different monster from grooming. And hey, if you started getting help from all of this, it might be a blessing in disguise.
As I have just shown, there are several mentions of Suzy trying to get people in the Cloud Palace, Doodletones Discord server, to change their mind on the situation around George, even leading up to the video's release. And as you have seen in what I have just shown you, there were other people groomed by Horus alongside Leo, those being both Autumn and Saph, those being the ones that were known at the time, but as you will see in Suzy's video, there is no instance where these people were named as being victim of Horus, despite Suzy knowing about this in 2020. For context, Autumn and Saph were 16 to 17 in 2016 to 2017, which is when Horus drew them both doing the magic trick that's part of Horus's kink, and drew them both in the Snow White dress. Thankfully, we now have access to those Discord DM conversations between those parties. As we can see currently on screen, we can see the DMs that Saph had between them and George, showing George posting the magic trick and drawing them in a Snow White dress. As we can see in Saph's messages, we can clearly see evidence of George drawing the pair, Saph and Autumn, in George's magic trick kink, more specifically the Dakota chair trick. This is also reflected with Autumn's messages with the same pattern of behaviour, even asking have they seen what they posted in their NSFW vent. I would also like to bring up that Suzy had access to and used Horus's document as research when doing their video, which also does state within it that Horus drew the minors in the magic trick within the very own document.
So I've made this a few months after my situation happened, and I've mostly kept it to myself.
Not gonna lie, being the primary person who was defending you when that was happening and has been defending your innocence in regards to the grooming allegations themselves, reading this first is definitely a new insight. I will ask though, if you don't mind, while I know not everything on there was explicitly sexual, why did you let minors on your not safe for work account?
Because I thought they might like the magic videos I've sent them, along with the potential Snow White drawings. Are you having second thoughts about me?
No, because while I don't think you were a groomer, I have been saying you were kind of irresponsible for doing that. But that said, irresponsibility doesn't equal grooming.
Yeah.
So unless there's more to this document that implicates you being more than irresponsible, my opinion probably won't change.
So you only got as far as chapter 1.
Yeah, I'm just now reaching C2.
Also, I need to ask that you don't post it around anywhere.
Alright, you were irresponsible at worst, and Leo's document comes off as super manipulative. These were things I did say in October.
This may sound like I'm drilling a point home, but I really want to emphasize the fact that Suzy had a lot more information than what they actually included in their final video. Now that I brought up George's own document that he made in relation to this situation, I think it's important that we show what information Suzy didn't include within their own video, given the fact that they had access to this document way before anyone else had it in the SEC, even before it was made public. So without further ado, it's time for a brief detour into George's own document. This document that Suzy had access to, mind you, and read, does a lot in the way of breaking down a lot of the arguments that Doodle made in their video, to an insane degree, given this comes right from the Raccoon's mouth. Brushing aside the random additional information of what countries George and Leo live in, George starts by explaining how, and I quote, "Whenever I shared magic tricks with people in a DM, I don't think, man, I want them to be a part of my kink, or man, I want them to have the same kink as me. I typically think to myself, hopefully they'll like this video when I send it to them." This is a flat out lie, as we have seen from Saph and Autumn's messages alongside Leo's Twitter interactions with George, where he places them all in his kink, which George would even admit to in a document he references in the start of this document with his messages with a member of the SEC named Porkate, alongside this document itself, and I quote, "One drawing I drew of him that was really bad in hindsight was him vanishing in a chair." And I quote, "In hindsight, one of the only aspects I truly did wrong with the account was drawing 3 specific people vanishing in a trick, as that definitely did make me look really bad in hindsight. I'll focus on the one with Leo a little later, but for now, I'm going to focus on the other 2 that I drew vanishing, Gwen and Autumn. Back in 2016, I asked them if they wanted to follow it, and they said yes. At the time, they were dating each other, and so not only did I draw them in the dress, but I asked them if they wanted me to draw them in one of the tricks I showed them, the Dakota chair. They eventually said yes. but I had no idea that they felt grossed out. They didn't give me any indication about how they truly felt at that moment. Regardless, it's one of the drawings I don't look back at fondly in general. This ideology of George putting the onus on the victims to show discomfort mirrors the one Doodle uses in their own video, which leads me to think this ideology is something both of them shared and enabled and was weaponized in this document and the video. The following is Twitter posts by Saph sharing their experience. Mind you, it doesn't show proof, but again, Doodle never asked George for any of his messages with either Saph or Autumn, reinforcing my belief that Doodle made sure to turn an intentional blind eye to this evidence. A lot of this remaining chapter of the document is George blaming his victims for not showing discomfort, but I will highlight how he states he would have still continued to send them the magic trick kink if they didn't show discomfort. And I quote, "Had Gwen or Autumn not given a negative type of reaction to me, then I would have continued sending them videos and drawings, all while they continued to harbour these extremely judgmental and assumption-heavy thoughts about me." End quote. I'm sorry, but how much of a self-victimizing pussy can you be to continue this idea? Keep in mind, Doodle had no issues with this part of the document. In chapter 2 of the doc, George explains how and why he invited Leo to his NSFW account, bringing up how Saph told him not to draw Leo in the Snow White dress in 2017, but I will point out there is no mention or reasoning stated that he forgot that conversation, which Doodle uses as an argument in their video. But George's amazing explanation in why he added them to the account was because Leo's account was suspended, and the new one showed that they really like Snow White still, despite George. And because George posted the character a lot on his NSFW account, he invited them there. First off, that makes no sense. Just have a regular account to post those drawings if we use the logic George didn't have a kink for Snow White. But the fact he seemed to post it the most on his NSFW account reinforces my belief it is a kink. And even then, it doesn't explain why he invited Saph or Autumn. The remaining chapters. Chapter 3 is a lot of the same, saying how Leo didn't show discomfort, so I'll be skipping over it. I'll be linking the document down below for you guys to check it out for yourself. Chapters 4, 5, and 6 contains people cutting off George slowly before the document came out, being people like Saph, Ray, Donnie, and Leo no longer wanting to follow his NSFW account, and then the community response when the document Leo made was published, and George beating himself up over it. Not really anything worthy of focusing on, but after George locked his accounts, Porkate decided to post their DM messages with George in a document I had referenced previously. A thing I will note here is that George in this section does state he never fully read Leo's document, claiming the reason for it was that he didn't feel comfortable reading a document that labelled him as scum and a child groomer. But if you're planning to make a document to clear your name of such claims, surely you need to read the damn document accusing you of such things, otherwise how are you meant to dispute all the claims pushed forward against you? More dismissing the victims again and again. Oh, and using how you have high functioning autism to not read someone's emotion? How lovely. You don't need to read emotion to know the fundamental fact you shouldn't talk to a minor like this. Chapter 7, Document's Conclusion. A lot of this conclusion is George crying how betrayed he felt by people he thought he could trust, and ending it off by saying he no longer views Leo as a good person, and the accusations against him were a smear campaign, and then proceeds to list the bullying tactics those people used. And I am sorry, but I can't help but laugh at this here. This is the list of bullying tactics that George lists in his document, and I will be going through them one by one. Smear campaign. People talking about their experiences. False accusations. Documented evidence. Blacklisting. Not wanting a groomer in their circles. Gaslighting. Proof. Gossip. Talking about the accusations. Humiliation. Laughing at disgusting child groomer. Isolation. Again, kicking them out of their circles. Personal attacks. Making fun of a disgusting person. Psychological abuse. I think it's just the SEC mind control at this point. Social exclusion. Kicked out. Setting up to fail? No, you did that when you started talking to minors about your kinks. Cyberbullying. Log off. Mobbing. How? And that was the very long and painful George document. My thought on it is the same I have felt up until this point, and that is how pathetic and self-aware I think George is. They continue to cry victim when they were the one grooming minors online, spending a lot of this document saying that what he did was bad, but ending it with, boo-hoo, look how harassed I was. And back to the DMs we go. Returning back to the DMs from when we last led off, we can see that Suzy describes Leo's document as manipulative, which is insane, and really goes to show their ideology when they were making their video.
Oh, by the way, I did happen to find a comment he left you in your confession videos where he says you're victim blaming by defending me.
Well, I did say it was sorta Leo's fault initially, which, victim or no, doesn't look good on me at all, so that was a mistake on my part.
Ah, it's definitely more accurate to say that we both screwed up in different ways. At least that's how I see it.
I do agree, but saying it like I did wasn't tactful.
As I have just shown you, we can see another reference to Suzy's 2019 stream, and how Doodle saying her victim blaming made her look bad. Ah yes, because your precious public image is the main issue here, and Doodle goes on to agree that it was partly Leo's fault. You are quite literally still blaming the victim.
Look, when Leo sits there and says something along the lines of Snow White dresses are his kink and he will deny it, so don't believe him, effectively shutting out any further discussion, yeah, no, I was not on his side. I definitely shouldn't have blamed him for when we had less info. However, I have still stuck to my guns. I was manipulative, and I didn't see any evidence of you grooming.
You were manipulative?
Oh no, sorry, XD, it was manipulative. Typo.
And also, I don't think this was a typo given all we know now, more so a Freudian slip. The following screenshots is more proof of Suzy trying to warm people back up to the idea of George being let back into the community in preparation for their 2021 video. In these DMs there's also reference of them talking to people in the Cloud Palace in order to warm them back up to the idea of George coming back, and overall hints at a manipulative pattern of behaviour that Suzy is trying to do in order to get George back into these spaces, and also in turn in the same spaces as his victims. Which we now know through hindsight was very effective after Suzy released their George video, letting George come back into the SEC spaces and causing his own victims to apologise to him. Congratulations, Doodletones, you effectively defended a predator, letting them back into your spaces and communities where other people could be affected by them, and had his own victims apologise to them and thinking they were in the wrong for being groomed. Something we all know that if you had learnt that someone else had done this, you would have beaten them to death in a screaming match. And yes, you heard that right, both Saph and Autumn felt obligated to apologise to George as seen here. Now after speaking with both Autumn and Saph, I do have their statements here and I will be playing them in order.
I'm just gonna kind of go off the cuff here and see where that goes. This lasted about 2-ish years, not even that, like it was maybe like a year, and it was by far way shorter than most experiences I've had online when it came to adults trying to take advantage of me. But I think it's still important to note this story anyway. So I joined the commentary community when I was freshly 16 in June of 2016. I met George through a Skype group that a person known as Ray Kohai had, and it had like maybe 50 people in there. It was a very large group of people, and very active because of that. And I met George and who we will now know as Amity through there. I would start getting acquainted with everybody, and I would join the commentary group known as Fox afterwards. And that's kind of where my friendship with George started. And as well, I would start dating Amity later on, a couple months later. We started doing a lot of things together as a couple afterwards. We also had private Twitter accounts for like almost everybody in that group. And we would all follow each other on there instead of, well, honestly, on top of the Discord chats that we'd have later on where we had vent channels. But primarily, we would have a lot of people follow each other's vent accounts back in the day. I was following George's private account because he had one that was just for venting, and I would also follow Amity's, obviously. And eventually we were both invited to another account George had that was explicitly called his NSFW Twitter account. This was a account where he would posts a lot of his fetishes and his more so kind of like more private vent. It was a place where people that he trusted more would be. And Amity and I were two of those people, and we were still allowed on. I didn't think too much about it at the time. I thought it was fine. I should also note that there was also a pinned tweet on that account that explicitly said two particular things on there. One of them was a note of a certain magic trick that he liked that turned him on sexually, and the other was how he just liked drawing people in the Snow White dress. And on top of that, apparently was not gonna retweet like explicit porn or nudity on that account. So Amity and I were approached by George at the same time if he could draw us depicted in one of the magic trick scenarios that he had a sexual interest in, and both of us being 16 to 17 at the time, we didn't really know why he was asking this, but we let him do it, and he sent us both the image of us in a depiction of the magic trick. It was the one where he had both of us sitting in a separately across from each other, and we had a dog in our lap. It was one of those, I think it was one of those vanishing tricks or something, or Dakota chair one. I remember that's what he said when I looked back on the logs, but I remember seeing and being asked if I could be drawn in that depiction. He also drew me and Amity in the Snow White dresses. That was another thing that he was very, very insistent on. He was very insistent on comments as well, and tried to preen on our thoughts on the images he drew. He was very insistent, and if you didn't respond, he would get very upset and guilt-trippy. Overall, he was just very guilt-trippy if you didn't respond to him at all, in any shape or form. But these were like, he was very upset if you didn't respond right away. Or, he would kind of beat himself up if you didn't respond in a way he liked. This was also just outside of, the fetish stuff that he sent us. He also would send, again, the videos that he was talking about, and then also he sent me in particular characters that he knew I liked in the Snow White dress to try and get me to like the idea of the thing more. He didn't send me any more of the magic trick stuff again, but he was very explicit on the Snow White stuff. He even would send me stuff in recent years with characters that I liked in the Snow White dress. That was in 2024. But afterwards, I haven't gotten anything since George sent the Snow White dress pictures to me. That, I believe then afterwards, that was when Amity and I pushed back, and we didn't really like talking to him. We had some spats at some point. I don't remember what we were arguing about, but considering how he got upset at me and Amity over us wanting to draw a picture of his character dabbing and getting so mad he would rage quit the call, I imagine it was probably over something ridiculously stupid like that. I would not put that past him. And so later on, he would go on to try to do the same thing to Leo. In 2019, apparently was stopped in 2017 by Amity. I don't have recollection of that personally. That's something I cannot vouch for 100%, but I can believe it. But I do remember the stuff with Leo in 2019, and we, all three of us, had collectively agreed to make a document, or at least had Leo make a document about it, because we thought that the only evidence we had was only on Twitter. And at that point, I believe I had deactivated that Twitter account, or Amity had deactivated that Twitter account, her own Twitter account. I'm not sure what happened there, but I think we just stuck with Leo at the time because we were both adults by the time we were going to call George out. So we stuck with Leo, and he had Vivian post his document in his stead, and I don't remember Suzy Doodletones posting a stream about it. I don't really remember that. I definitely do remember her defending George right off the bat. Even beforehand, I don't recall why I remember her being against that, but I just remember her not agreeing with the allegations that George was a groomer. Cue to me in 2020, I called out Vivian for also being a groomer, because I also made tweets against Horus at the time, or George at the time, against him, and also having my testimony saying that I was treated the same way when I was 16. And then Q to 2020, I've completely distanced myself from the commentary community, and I just I hadn't really bothered interacting with anybody from that community since. I find out about Suzy's video in 2021 shortly after she posted it alongside George's document, and I was pretty mad about that. I didn't like that video at all. I didn't comment on it because I saw the backlash that Amity got, and I saw the backlash that Rin got when he sent his comment to me, and I saw people were just dogging on both of them, and I felt like I was just not gonna bother commenting because I was just gonna get the same response regardless. I already had another person commenting or replying to a comment I made on a video that I didn't even know that they were even looking for me at all, and so they saw me and then they just dogged on me afterwards. It was on a completely different video in a completely different situation, but basically the tides had completely turned by the time that video had released, and we were all painted as liars, and we falsely accused George of being a groomer. And at the time, I didn't realize how much that backlash just internalized to me, and to go up to 2022. By this point, I already was aware another document had been made on Ray Kohai. It was a giant document, and I wanted to address a couple things from that document that mentioned me by name. And one of them was from George. George mentioned my name on there for the stuff about a convention that we both went to and attended at the time, and also I just wanted to clarify a bit further on my story regarding George, and that was when I first denounced George being called a groomer, because I definitely did start doubting myself if I even was right about George being a groomer to begin with. So I denounced that, and I apologized. Cue to another year later, around October, I rejoined the commentary community at this point, after reconnecting with everybody, including George, and I went out of my way to DM George. It was one of the first messages I sent to his new account, and I apologized. Just directly apologized to him. I completely denounced calling him a groomer, and I said if there's anything I can do to make up for what I did, I would be happy to do that. And to me, part of that making up to him was defending him whenever those allegations came up, and was going to risk him being canceled again, basically. There was a call in February of 2024. It was in the Senate when that was still up and running, and we were gonna call Michael Schomer. He was somebody who also did not treat me well as a child, and trauma dumped to me as well as many of my friends at the time. And I remembered there were some allegations that Schomer still believed in regarding George, and part of my reason of why I wanted to join that call was to highlight my experience with Shomer, but also to denounce George as a groomer. That was something that I absolutely wanted to get out of the way first and make sure that Shomer did not say a word about George that I thought was false. I was told to believe was false. That's one of the biggest public instances of me defending George. I also had consoled him a lot whenever he started getting upset over how Vivian and Rachel treated him when they called him a groomer. I've consoled him multiple times. I've told him to his face that he's not a groomer multiple times. And there was another call in December of 2024, twice actually, 2 calls. One was when another person was brought up old messages from George that was kind of trauma dumpy towards a minor, and we brushed that off initially because it didn't seem substantiated enough, and also we were concerned, I was concerned at least, that the allegations were going to be brought up again when they, in my mind, had already been proven false and I had denounced ever wanted to call him that. I denounced calling him a groomer. And there was another call where we confronted the same person who came forward with those allegations, and we, or at least me and Suzy specifically, defended Horus in that call. I know I was definitely not as actively speaking as Suzy, but I definitely was defending George at that point. And so everything's kind of quiet on that end regarding George for a while, up until, of course, until April of 2025, where Julie slightly mentions a conversation between herself and Avi Haltman, and Avi directly sourced the allegations against George and said that, oh, I'm not a pedophile because George is not a pedophile for doing the same thing I'm doing. And that prompted Julie to come back into the community for a second and ask about the allegations against George and to see how bad, if it was actually a case of George being done dirty. And everything just kind of transpired from there.
So, George Raccoon. I met him when I was 15 years old. 15, and he would have been 19, because there is a 4-year age gap between him and I. I met him in 2015, mid-2015, and things would be normal for a while, like, at most, like, he was a little self-destructive at times, a little bit, but then comes 2016, so I know Autumn's in the chat. Hello, Autumn. For anyone out of the loop on that, Autumn and I used to date. And we had already had one person in our fucking ears who was a grown-ass adult talking about how we should move in with her. But then we have George. So George, he would like to do this thing where he would draw people in, like, a Snow White dress, which, like, whatever. Fine, that's cool. It's a 5-year... He was born in 95. It's a 5-year difference? That's worse! That's worse! Autumn! Fuck! So he was... Okay, so I guess there's a 5-year age gap. He would draw people in Snow White dresses because that was, like, his thing. I guess that was, like, a source of comfort for him. Which, like, fine. Whatever. That's fine. He was drawing children in the same dresses and calling them so adorable and pretty princesses. And that would be, 2 of those people would be Autumn and I, when we were 16. And he was, I guess, 21! But that's not like the bad part. It's still weird calling, a bunch of children pretty princesses and adorable. Cause, like, okay, because Ty's pointing it out, let me get this out of the way. The age gap is not inherently not the issue. It is the fact that he was doing this with minors. Ty and I are 4 years apart. And we are in a perfectly happy, healthy relationship. So that wasn't the inherent issue. The issue comes in when we talk about a certain kink that George had. And this kink was magic tricks. And we get, as you can see, this is a drawing of Autumn and I in a magic trick. For record, this was on March 16th, 2017. I had just turned 17, 11 days prior. He would then link us fucking magic trick videos, where this one is called Transposition of 2 Girls and 2 Puppy. And first of all, the girls are in lingerie, and we were, again, 16 and 17. Then we get art of Autumn in the Snow White dress. There's the whole pretty princesses thing, and you two are equally cute. No, you're so cute. You're so cute, Saph. You're so cute, Autumn. This says, by the way, I have another idea. What if you and Autumn did this trick and you turn into a Dalmatian? I don't respond because this is 2017. I was in high school. And also, I was not online as much. And he's like, did you see the video I sent you? Oh my god, did you see it? There's like so many more that I do plan on posting. At a later date. Again, reminder, Leo was 16. And so I caught onto this because obviously I had been groomed by George. I'm calling it what it is. It was grooming. And I caught that, and we had a whole discussion. And that's when me and a certain other person, encouraged him to make a document. But it was meant to be private, but that other person then went on to convince Leo to make it public. So that happened, we made it public. George ran off the internet for a while, except for one person. He stayed in contact with one person, and that would be none other than infamous commentator / internet personality Suzy Doodletones, who was working with George behind the scenes, going off about how he was basically saying that George was spoctored, then later released a video basically saying that George had not groomed Leo, that I was someone spearheading a hate campaign towards George. And then, like, behind the scenes, like, again, I already mentioned this, there were people blaming me, saying that I inserted this idea that George groomed Leo into his head, which fucking, what? And the reason that this was being spewed was not out of a genuine, like, cause of interest / worry in Leo. It was because of who I was associated with at the time. I was associated with my fucking assaulter and my abuser, and that warranted blaming me for George, a pedophile, being outed from the community. So, good job, guys! Good fucking job! Good job! Good fucking job! My god, y'all are... Pat yourselves on the back, give yourselves a fucking cookie, and go fuck yourself. I'm sure... And the same goes for Suzy. Stay the fuck gone. Have fun knowing you put children in danger. Don't ever claim that you care so much about the safety of children on the internet when this is the bullshit you do.
Now, I will be linking Saph's original video in the description if you wish to see the whole thing. However, in a final-ish caveat, under Doodletones' own words in their communication video, they shouldn't have even had any right to make this video, and I'll be showing that to you right now. In Doodletones' 2024 communication video, she makes a point to say how she compared herself to someone who doubted a victim of someone called RCV5, even referencing the George Raccoon situation.
That Habit's initial screenshots aren't the best pieces of evidence to confirm this. And even they themselves make note of that fact early on in the document. But kinda like with any grooming allegation, I do at least want to give some benefit of doubt in favor of the victim, and at least to my knowledge, RCB hasn't revealed any information that would otherwise counteract the allegations against them, so I am more willing to believe Habit in this regard, at least until further notice. Now, what I just did there was playing an actually neutral party. You'd look at the evidence given when the victim wishes to tell their story. You'd hear the victim first and parse through the information that they give. It's basic courtesy, and it's not disrespectful to the person who felt victimized in their situation. However, Morgan didn't do that. Morgan instead immediately turned to the alleged groomer to hear their side of the story first, because that's certainly a play that normal people do when they want information about someone's past actions. Already, we have a particularly egregious situation on our hands, similarly to my initial knee-jerk response to the George Raccoon allegations in 2019. We did later confirm that Morgan didn't actually read any of Habit's document or screenshots at the beginning of December, so I don't think I'm merely saying this on the basis of not liking Morgan's actions or to make a point about how poorly Morgan handled the situation.
She makes this point to illustrate her reaction to the George allegations in 2019, and yet she would go on to make the same mistakes that she shows here.
At least if she published it to Twitter, she could have given herself the benefit of Twitter possibly burying the tweet. But this basically forced the contrarianism into a much more confined space and had everyone's attention who was online to see it at the time, especially the very person she's casting doubt upon. Remember that Morgan definitely didn't go to Habit with these doubts directly, so it's not like Morgan wanted the victim of the behaviors to hear her thoughts. She wasn't ready to tell off the victim what she truly thought of the evidence against their abuser, which, no, you don't have to do. Obviously, I'm not saying to go around and interrogate every victim willy-nilly, but obviously Morgan wants us to be on her side. That's why she was afraid of posting onto Twitter. Plus, I think it's to be said how much Morgan was making Habit's abuse all about Morgan. It's Morgan that's afraid to talk about the abuse. It's Morgan who is worried we'll dogpile her. It's Morgan whose opinion should matter the most as an impartial third party, or so she says.
It's not like Suzy was ready to tell the victim what she truly thought of the evidence against her abuser. Doodle wants us to be on her side. She was afraid to say anything publicly after 2019. It's Doodle who's afraid of getting dogpiled for defending George. It's Doodle's opinion that should matter as an impartial third party. Also, she claims she is trying to be in the George video, but Doodle simply does not apply her own standards to herself here. Sure, you could claim she had a change in mindset since 2024 and 2021, however, given how she viewed her own behaviour about the George situation in 2019 as the bad way of handling it, by her specifying it there and does not denounce her way of handling it in 2021, it would be fair to assume that in 2024 she stands by what she said in the 2021 video. Now, there are two other people I would like to mention in this video, and that is both Donnie and Porkate. Donnie was also a victim of Horus and was one of the people who gave pushback on Suzy's defending Horus originally until being suppressed, as Suzy had clearly made her bias known in the Cloud Palace and pushed her ideology onto people like Donnie for a long period of time. I will play my interview with them now. However, as a preface for this interview, given how Donnie and Porkate didn't know that Horus was being a negative influence on them, the evidence of their interactions are hard to find, so this portion is mainly verbal testimony, but given how messages line up in the Cloud Palace, I'm more inclined to believe them. I will also note that my OBS recording messed up during this call, leading to myself being quite inaudible, meaning I had to, with both of their permission, cut together audio to have the audio make sense. Yes, I'm a bimbo, I know.
For a little bit of a disclaimer, I can't gather proof for a good chunk of what I'm going to talk about because it would have happened either on Skype, which is long gone, my first Discord account that's deleted, and any Twitter account that is deleted. There are people who can vouch at least that I did meet George when I was a minor. I was 16. It was late 2015 when I met him and we were friends. There were some, inside jokes we had pretty fast, most of which were harmless. There were some NSFW ones as far as I remember, and it's some of the same ones that he was pushed onto Autumn and Saph. He did privately talk to me about the Snow White dress, and he would draw it onto a lot of characters, and he claimed that it wasn't a fetish. From what I remember, he did talk to me in detail about the Snow White dress, and I did follow his NSFW account when I was 17, because he made the account in 2016, and I definitely followed that and I remember it, so I would have been 16, 17. I don't remember him directly sending me the magic trick thing, but I would have been aware of it through seeing that account. They talked about it on there as far as I remember, but the account wasn't archived. I do also remember him constantly wanting my attention, even up until recent events. When I first came out as trans. I was 17, and he told me that for a while he had feelings for me, and he would have asked me out if I didn't transition.
Now keep in mind that at this time, George would have been 4 years older than Donnie.
And he would have been talking about, at least talking about things he was into and such to me when I was a minor. I didn't really understand it being a problem back then. Not help that I had been groomed by multiple other adults, and those situations, the two in mine in particular, were so bad that I didn't process like any other factors, I guess, or any other people that would have contributed. I do remember in a private call I had with him at some point, I think last year, he approached me about when he had a crush on me when I was a minor. He was like distressing about it, and he kind of made me justify it on the spot and didn't want me to talk about it to anyone else.
Well, this is new to me.
Yeah, I didn't talk about it with anyone else. And I've been dating...
Oh, sorry.
I've been dating Dylan since early 2020. So in 2019, October 2019, was when the document Leo had made about his experiences with George was being made. If I remember correctly, I wasn't the first person informed of it, but like, I remember being angry when I found out about it, and I was one of the people that spread it back then. I was also dating Vivian at the time, who was not only one of my groomers, but someone who assaulted me later on. Just 2 months after that doc went public, actually, less than. Vivian is important to this because of Suzy alleging that Vivian had spearheaded the situation. When what she did was post the document, but she didn't write it. She claimed that she led the situation, or that she created the allegations, or put it in Leo's head that the allegations were real. She went by Charlie back then, and up until her death went by Vivian. The trauma with Vivian's kind of intertwined with George, because like the claim as well, because like George beforehand had made a document like about how Vivian was mistreating George, and Vivian did say some nasty things to George, I will admit, but I think part of that was partially how it was successful in convincing me to accept George back in my life. I think it had been early 2021. Am I correct, Dylan?
It was April of 2021, I'm pretty sure.
He said that he forgave me because I was hurt by Vivian. And he also showed the thread where I came out about Obsidious fan grooming me, who was he was a countdown YouTuber, one of the smaller ones, and he groomed me on Skype from when I was like, it was especially prominent when I was 15 to 16, but we met when I was 14. Because I had stated that his behavior was similar to Obsidious fan in my eyes. So I had been isolated and kicked out by Rachel's group. She claimed that I was an abuser and that all I do is drag others down, and at one point had her nickname for me be Leech. And Dylan had also been isolated by Rachel several months beforehand, and...
It was funny enough, it was in April of 2020, 1 year before Doodletones contacted both of us about George.
April 2021. I was already around Doodle, and I basically was like on and off around her, and then I was more full-fledged friends with her after Rachel kicked me out of her group. We were essentially reflecting on all the other people that Rachel had kicked out or claimed was an abuser, and it turns out she was lying or manipulating. Dylan and I both fell victim to that. To Rachel doing that to us. With us losing a lot of people at once, we would have like wanted to see about having more friends again. Doodle essentially, I feel like she was kind of using that, intentionally or not, to like take advantage, help use that to convince us to let him back in our lives. It was me first that she convinced, and then I talked to Dylan about it. Essentially, I was used as a tool to get my partner to get in contact with George.
And that concludes the victim statements part of this video. So far, we've had Suzy welcoming a predator back into the community and silencing those affected due to George being a close friend of Suzy and him not wronging her personally. Now this is where I would say the video ends. However, I would like to show a pattern in behaviour from Suzy that I have been alluding to. And Suzy, in her George video, had pointed me to the perfect example where she compares what happened to George with V Omega, which is interesting to mention given the fact that we would learn that Suzy had no problem with people being friends with someone like V Omega due to her friendship with George Raccoon, as seen in this message that was posted in the Cloud Palace server. Now why am I bringing this up? Well, aside from Suzy's own wording saying that V and George are the same in terms of being bad people, it directly ties to what had become known as the Cloak and Dagger situation, giving us another instance of Suzy's hypocritical and vested self-interest and survivability. A topic that I'll be doing a complete timeline of to save people a lot of time and day, but for a brief overview of what that situation entails, on the 30th of the 7th, 2023, Doodletones posted this message in the Cloud Palace, explaining how a member of the community called Vigil was friends with the predator V Omega, who had previously been outed from the community. In these messages, Suzy shows her conversation with Vigil, where they end up on somewhat amicable terms, which is quite out of pocket for Suzy, given the focus of their content being to oust predators and the likes from their communities. A point to note in these messages is Vigil's confusion and why this is being brought up now of all times. A reasoning to this confusion could be explained by the aforementioned message Suzy put in the Cloud Palace, saying that she would have no issue with people being friends with V Omega. Other people of relevance who are aware of Vigil's friendship with V Omega include users Keyblade, Tippy, Dolsmic, Mavstation, and Neko Shadows, who were the main focus of the Cloak and Dagger calls, a collection of calls titling, and I shit you not, 7 hours, where said people were lambasted for their knowledge of Vigil's friendship with V, and apparently hiding said information from those in the Cloud Palace and Doodletones herself. Now Yan, you may be asking, why is this even an issue if we know Doodletones had prior knowledge of Vigil's friendship with V even before it was posted about in the Cloud Palace? Well, that's where the current popular theory comes into play. Whereas Vigil's outing from the Cloud Palace may have only been kept to that circle, and that is an assumption, the knowledge of the V-Vigil friendship had not, and from his own recollection and mention of it in the calls of Cloak and Dagger, had made its way to Lyo Convoy, which forced Doodle to change their plan of originally having a call with those names mentioned by herself, changing into the first call, including Lyo Convoy himself and Hita Mitsuri. The reasoning behind this change is of course speculation, and using information pieced together from the calls, but the running theory is this was all a massive gay-op to stop Lyo from looking into the Cloud Palace server, which is an entirely different can of worms I will not be getting into today. However, speaking of the Cloud Palace, let's see who else was aware of Vigil's friendship with V Omega and didn't have an issue with people being friends with V and was present for the Cloak and Dagger calls. Of course we have Doodletones herself already, and also her at the time partner Jace, as seen in this message between themselves and Vigelcio in Cloud Palace. Keep in mind V Omega was ousted on June the 27th, 2020. The next person listed has less solid proof towards them knowing. However, it would be remiss for me not to bring it up here, and that is Hita Mitsuri, reacting to messages in relation to a conversation about Vigil on his now deleted Discord account, being friends with V Omega. And of course Jace is already there, but we already have confirmation of their knowledge of the friendship. Again, I'm aware this isn't as concrete as a point, but I'll leave you guys to come to your own opinions on how much good faith should be given here, given Heaton's past actions that have come to light. But I will point out the conversation this is pulled from is about Autumn, a victim of George, where they are being called a waste of sperm. Yes, these creatures know no shame. Moving right along, Avi Holtman is the account name Crouching Idiot, so what I said of Heaton also applies. There is also this message right above Suzy's hypocrite message as shown earlier in this video. With these factors in mind alone, I can say confidently that Suzy, though she kept around her in her close circle in the Cloud Palace, had absolutely no issue with letting predators they were on good terms with slip through the door without catching major flack. In my opinion, there are two options here. 1. Suzy saw herself in Vigil's shoes as seen in her Hypocrisy message, realizing deep down that even though she was defending George, she knew he was this awful person, and if George was such a bad person, what would that make her? But she didn't have it in her to cut him off or not try to help him come back. Or 2. Suzy truly didn't have an issue with staying friends with predators or friends of predators, wanting to let Vigil off easy. Keep in mind, those attacked in the Cloak and Dagger calls only knew about Vigil's friendship with V. Suzy was the one to let Vigil run off without any persecution, given how people in the ACC/SCC are all about public calls. But no, she still allowed Vigil to stay within the Cloud Palace server, letting him silently exit the community without a major confrontation, but after people Suzy knew would have an issue with this caught wind, she went on full duck and blame mode, shifting the target to the main group attacked in the cloak and dagger calls, and keeping that lens away from herself and her close friends. Both of these situations paint a picture of how the SEC was run for the longest time, full of tribalism and backdoor dealing, where those at the top could use and shift narratives onto people smaller than them, or escalate small claims into dramatized hate campaigns. For Doodletone herself, it truly shows how she put her and her friends first, even if said friends are awful, disgusting people, and how she used her platform and place as figurehead of the SEC to better herself first and foremost, and really puts into question her beliefs around grooming, and is more willing to side with said groomers if she likes them. I would like everyone who is watching this to give people like Saph, Autumn, Porkate, Donnie, Leo, and Joni some love, as the way this community has treated them is sickening. I would also like to thank all the people who helped me make this video, first being Hexglyph, the person who made this video's thumbnail, and also all of the people who have helped me in the SEC with research for this video. This will most likely not be my only video on people like Doodletones, and given how truly expansive Cloak and Dagger is, a complete summary video condensing it is in order. But with all that said, thank you very much for watching. This has been Yan, and I'm going to sleep. And please enjoy the outro.